Computer, okay. Well, good evening. Of course, you know me, I'm Rustam Engineer, and this is welcoming you to the online event put up by the WZCC Houston chapter. Now, those of you who have lived in Houston for the last 2 or 3 decades very likely already know our speaker, that is Atul Veer, or at least you have heard or read about him. Now, he's the man who has always thought outside the box and is filled with an admirable spirit of entrepreneurship. I really admired him for a long, long time. About 13 years ago, Atul was invited to our WZCC meeting, and I had the privilege of introducing him as an entrepreneur. And now I'm really delighted to have him again with us, not just as an entrepreneur, but also as an author to talk about his latest book. So that much for the background. And now I request Charmin Irani, our Houston chapter chair, to take over and continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Rustam.
Welcome.
Thank you. So actually, before I get started, I'd like to go over some moderating guidelines for this meeting. To enable a clearer presentation, everybody will be muted through the call. I think you already have been muted. And we will have a Q&A session at the end of the call. And this will be a moderated session. So please post your questions in the chat window of the meeting for all to view. Charles will be moderating the Q&A session and will reference the questions that are posted in the chat window. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and it's really great to see all of you. So we are thrilled to have Mr. Atul Veer presenting this evening. Mr. Veer is the founder and CEO of Equator Advanced Appliances, an Indian-born entrepreneur. He is known for designing some of the very innovative household appliances, such as like a combo washer dryer. His work has led to 18 patents and a global reputation for innovation. Equator manufactures washers, dryers, cooktops, microwaves, and several other appliances. Their products are distributed in the US, and if you go online, you'll see they actually via Home Depot and stuff, and also internationally. They have interests in Canada, Mexico, Europe, India, and China. So very, very proud. It's an international distributor. They internationally distribute their products. Mr. Veer has captured his entrepreneurial experiences, journey, and learnings via his book. He is the author of Underdog Thinking, and this is his book right here, Underdog Thinking, A Bold Idea, a Business Adventure, and 101 Lessons Learned Along the Way. The book is true to its title and its subtitles. It is part business, it's a part business book, part adventurous saga, part testament to the power of a singular idea, and part life business manual packed with lots of nuggets of learning. This book is a lesson in entrepreneurship, cultural diversity, globalism, relationships, trust, betrayal, perseverance, innovation, and so much more. From the jungles of wartime Africa to the bull riding landscape of Houston, Texas, and to the distant exotic industrial cities of China, this book takes us on a vicarious journey through the experiences of Mr. Atul Veer. Trust and honesty are the themes that run through this book. Humility, sacrifice, ethics, hard work, and honesty is the hallmark that comes across loud and clear in this book. And it's, even through the business genre in general. So with this, I would like to turn this over to Mr. Atul Veer to share his experiences and learnings with us this evening. Thank you. Atul, over to you.
Thank you. I was sitting in my office and I heard an explosion. There were bullets flying everywhere. One of them hit my glass window in the office I was sitting in. And in some time, I heard a roar of tanks on the street. I was 29 years old and I was wondering where I had reached in my life. I was in Nigeria. This was my 7th year in Africa and the 7th coup d'etat that I was going through. This is the way that my book starts, and this reflects what happens from then for the next 30 years of my life up to today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation from the WZCC to address your chamber. It's a very gracious invitation. Particularly, I want to thank Rustam Engineer, who I met 13 years ago on my first invitation, Sharmin Irani for inviting me today, and my old school friend, Rashid Kapadia, who I have known for more than 50 years. So the first time I was invited to speak, I was invited by Rustam as a success story. You knew me as an entrepreneur. You had been to my old building. We had an art gallery. The second time now, I am coming before you with a story. I don't know what happened to the success part of it, but I have a story now. It's an honor to be invited by the Zoroastrian community, who is one of the greatest mercantile communities in the world, successful, and also with community development, and most of all with ethics. And that is something I have always aspired for. I'm sharing my screen now. I grew up in India, and I'm sure like most of you, many of you, and I went to a military boarding school, and the goal of my life at that time was to have a good education and get a good job. And so I finished school, I went to college, I did my chartered accountancy, I did my master's degree. And in those days, in the late 70s, early 80s, India was a different place. It was difficult to get a job at that time. And in my field, which was in the business commerce field, there were very few opportunities to go overseas, unlike doctors and engineers who had the opportunity to go to UK and America. Most of my colleagues were going to the Middle East, and that's something I didn't want to go. So when I got the opportunity to go to Africa, I took up that invitation. So I went to London for my interview, and it was difficult in those days because the ticket came from Nigeria. And in fact, I went to the Air India office on Nariman Point, and they had difficulty even sort of validating the ticket. But anyway, I went to London for my interview. I passed the interview, and then I worked in London for some time before I went to Africa. There are lots more details in the book, but needless to say, I was supposed to go to Ivory Coast, but due to some circumstances and a fraud in the company, I was forced to deplane in Nigeria. And so for 7 years, I went between 8 or 10 different countries: Nigeria, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, Togo, Benin, and I sort of became an expert in these countries. In my boarding school, my housemaster used to read a story, and it was called King Solomon's Mines. And of course, growing up in India, we read about Phantom comics and Tarzan comics and so on. So Africa was never far. It seemed like a very exotic place and a lot of adventure that one could get into. So I grew in the company. I started off as a finance manager of one branch, and then I became regional controller and then financial controller and worked from London. My boss, he ran many different countries, but he didn't take some lessons to heart. And finally, due to some overexposure in many of the countries, particularly in Nigeria, there was a lot of problem, and we advised him to take preventive steps. And since he didn't take it, he felt he was the boss and he didn't want to listen to anybody else, and the company crumbled. And I was forced to make a new start. So the first lesson that I talk about in my book is that management lessons must be made by listening to those closest to the action. My book, of course, is called Underdog Thinking. And in this, I talk about the 101 lessons that I learned. The first time I spoke to this chamber, maybe I had learned about 50 lessons. So each lesson representing some new learning or a failure, because when you fail, then you learn something new. I decided to stop at 101 and at least to catalog them, because 101 in our Indian culture is a very lucky symbol. I said, in this case, let me write a book about these 101 lessons. So when the company crumbled, I decided to make a new start, and I moved to the US. In the meantime, I had got married. My wife was from the US, and I was expecting a young child. My wife moved back, and so I moved over here. I decided to get a job, and I applied for many jobs, 50 jobs, 70 jobs. In those days, there was no internet. And so I used to call different cities and get their newspaper, and where should I settle down? Where should I get a job? And very few people were willing to hire somebody who hadn't been educated in the US or who had any experience over here. So I decided to set up my own business, become an entrepreneur. And this is something very strange, because I don't come from a business family. I come from a service family. My father was a naval officer. My grandfather was a doctor, and there are engineers and so on. We come from a professional family. So when one decides to become a businessman, it was a big shock for our whole family, because here you are taking risks. And so what was the point of all that education when you're supposed to get a stable job? And it was even more in conflict because I went to a military boarding school where we had order and structure drilled into us from 6 o'clock in the morning till 10 at night. So it was quite a learning experience, and it took me quite a few years to get used to that free flowing atmosphere. But anyway, I decided to start off. It was in Houston, and I went to rent my first office. I didn't have any money. And this was at the Arena Towers, which is on the corner of Highway 59 and Bel Air. And so that time, Houston was just coming out of the oil crisis. And so I went to the leasing manager and I said, I want to lease an office. He's saying, here, you can sign it. If you sign the lease for 3 years, then I'm going to give you 6 months free. So that time there was a lot of vacancies and so on. So I negotiated a deal that's saying I'll pay with no money down, and the first 6 months we don't have to pay, and then the rents keep increasing. And so from this, I learned a valuable lesson that trust is very important, because I could have walked out in 6 months and I wouldn't have had to pay anything. So I learned the value of trust, that you have to be trusted in order to get something. And that was a very valuable lesson as an entrepreneur. So I didn't have any money. So I had this office, electricity was paid for. I had a few $100s. I went to an auction down the street and bought some secondhand furniture, some pieces of which we still have in my office 30 years later. And that is how I started, I remember the first day somebody walked into my office and he says, okay, this is a beautiful office. You have a coffee maker, you have a fax machine in those days, you have a nice desk and chair. But remember, this is America. You have to hustle. You have to go out and do everything yourself. Maybe in India, you don't have to do that. Maybe in Africa, you didn't have to do that because you have a lot of people to do things for you. But here you have to go and do it yourself. So another lesson that I learned, that you can't rely on anyone. You have to do it yourself. It takes some time to get used to these things. So meanwhile, I started doing business with Mexico and started doing some various things to keep business going, exporting old antique guns from India, .303 rifles, getting into cigarette exports to the Middle East because of exploring all my connections. But always I was looking for something stable. And so one day I was talking to my wife and I said, let's go to the beach. Let's go to Galveston. We had a young daughter by then, about a year or two old. And she says, well, I have to do this laundry or do all the washing on the weekend. We were living in an apartment, and the apartment, so she would walk about 50 yards to go to the coin-op machine and put the clothes in the washing machine, then come back. Then after half an hour, 45 minutes, go back and transfer from the washer to the dryer, then come back. Then again, you go back after 45 minutes and bring the clothes back. And that's only for one load. So this seemed like a very crazy thing to me. And I remember while we were in London, we had seen a machine which was actually a combination washer dryer. It's a machine that you throw your clothes in and it washes and dries in consecutive cycles. And then you come back and you take off the clothes and it does it automatically. And so I told her, why don't we go and look for this machine? And so we went to all the stores, that time Sears and Montgomery Ward and Circuit City and so on. And we asked for this machine and they said such a machine doesn't exist. In the meantime, my company Equator was already a year or so old. And I said, it's an international trading company and I was looking for opportunities. So this became almost like a quest that if I need this product, I'm sure I can sell it to other people, but I don't know where to find this product, but at least I know now I have an idea. So I went back to London and looked into whether I was making a mistake. Why is it available in Europe and not in America? And then I found out there were voltage issues and safety issues and so many different things, and it wasn't as simple. And so one thing led to another, and I went to a trade show in Germany. And after talking to many people, I tied up with a small Italian company who agreed to make a prototype for me in the US. And so they sent me a prototype about a year later. By then, Equator had grown. I had some credit cards and so on. And so by the time the first machine was developed, I decided that I needed to buy the first container. I didn't have a customer as yet, but I knew, that's from the bottom of my heart, almost like an instinct, that this is what I had to do. So by then so they said, okay, here is the machine. Do you approve? I said, yes, I approve. They said, okay, it's going to cost $25,000. Now, how are you going to pay? I went and cashed out all my credit cards, $25,000, and I wired the money. That was the second step in building trust. You have to let your suppliers and people you depend on trust you. If you break that trust, you're not going anywhere. So anyway, that was the lesson then, and I did get the machines in, and I had to make a start. Did have to make a start at that time. But of course, when you work for a company, you take things for granted because you do work, and at the end of the month, you do get paid. Something happens, and which means you get paid. But as an entrepreneur, nothing has to happen. I know many of you are entrepreneurs, and nothing has to happen. I mean, if you don't work, you don't sell, you don't make a profit, you still have your obligations. So this is the crossroads. And I go back to, this is the crossroads I was at that time. And I'm quoting from King Solomon's Mines. And I still read this book from time to time. And I'll read from this, which is also in my book. So partially I'm going to talk about my experiences, but also it's like a book reading. So I'll read this to you, which is very inspirational to me when I read it. It is far, but there is no journey upon this earth that a man may not make if he sets his heart to it. There is nothing that he cannot do. There are no mountains he may not climb. There are no deserts he cannot cross. If he holds his life in his hand, counting it as nothing, ready to keep it or lose it as providence may order. And that is the stage I was in. I had nothing to lose. All my education and experiences were worth it. And I had reached this, and I was in debt now for this $25,000. And now I had a container of washing machines that I hadn't even sold the first one. And here I was, that's where I started from. So, and this is what I keep referring to, that, that was the real crossroads. This is the first product that I launched from Italy, and I'm putting the date so you can get some kind of chronology. So I'm finishing my 30th year in business, started in 1991. It's really a long time. And, but this is the first machine that came in, and it's started. So now I had this container. I said, now what do I do? What do I do with this? And so then I started a marketing plan. I didn't have any more money. Now I have a container. I didn't have any employees. So I started contacting I bought a book, and that was called Guerrilla Marketing. And so I read about running a press campaign and how to do push-pull strategies of marketing. Of course, I'd only been in the US for a year or two by now. And here I was selling a washing machine, competing with Whirlpool and Frigidaire and Electrolux, and that time they had Maytag and Amana and so on. Of course, they didn't have the same product, but I had an unknown brand, you know. So I went to a company and I talked to them, and this was a rent-to-own company, and they said, "Well, you call it Equator, and you know it doesn't matter. Just call it after your company, and we will buy this from you." And so they became my first customer. But it wasn't easy. I talked to many companies, and they said, "Well, we'll take it on consignment. It's a front-loading machine." That time there was no front-loading machines in America. Now, of course, they're common. This was the first machine back then. So there was nothing. People said, is it not going to leak? Who is going to provide the parts? Who is going to do service? So I had to set all that up. I went to a store called Circuit City. Circuit City said, okay, we're going to run a focus group. And they ran the focus group and they came back. They said it was rejected. We've been doing laundry and washers and dryers separate for, for last 70 years or so. Why do we need a machine like this? This is actually the same machine we talked about, which is the combination washer dryer, which I thought is going to set America on fire and everybody will want to buy it and there'll be a line of people. But I had to learn that you actually have to sell the product. You can't just bring it in and keep it in the warehouse and have a line of people. So you go back to the first lesson, you have to go and hustle. So it wasn't so easy. Going back to Circuit City, they came back and said, it's not going to work. You know, we don't want it. Needless to say, Circuit City went out of business a year or two later, and you know I'm still here. So it just goes to show that I really don't believe in focus groups anymore because you know it's a one-sided view. I go back to Akio Morita, who was the president of Sony, and at that time we had the Walkman. You know, and he talked to his engineers. He talked to his engineers and said he was going for a walk, and he said it'll be nice to listen to some classical music while he's going for his walk. And his engineers said, this is a crazy idea. You know, nobody's going to listen to music while they're going on a walk. And he had to push them, even though he was the president, he had to push them. And finally, they came out, Sony came out with the Walkman, and that was a runaway success. And that made Sony jump to the next level above all its other competitors like Sanyo and Toshiba and so on, whereas they were all at par at that time. And so his famous quotation was, you cannot do market research on a product that does not exist. And up to today, we follow that because we are known as a company, even today, that brings in new products. We talk to a lot of people about these things and they say, no, it's going to fail. We said, it's okay. You can say that. It doesn't exist, but we will launch it. Okay, having said that, not every single product of ours has succeeded, but that was the story then. So the company grew. We started selling to many mom and pop stores. We had over 2,000 independent dealers all over the country. We had Montgomery Ward at that time contacted us. The buyer called me. He said, I saw your product in Fortune or Popular Mechanics. We had a full marketing program. We were in all the top magazines in the country. We went on Oprah and so on. So it was the product in the 90s. And people were calling us and saying, where can we get this product? So I went to Montgomery Ward and had a 6-hour meeting with them. And finally, we're going to roll it out in 500 stores. And so it was a very successful launch. And the company grew astronomically. And I'll show you the full, this is the build out that we had. So I've just shown an idea. You have the idea, you have the product, how you do the financing, the sales, the admin logistics, customer service, and these are all the departments that I had to quickly set up, you know. And by 2001, 10 years after I started, this is the product line that we had. A full line of product, because the Montgomery Ward buyer told me, he says, listen, I deal with Whirlpool and so on. I give them 1-hour appointments. I've given you 6 hours of my time. You have only one product. You're a very nice guy, Mr. Veer, but you need to come up with a full portfolio to make it worth my while. So I said, okay, here I'm forced to do new products. Do I have any joy in selling refrigerators? It's a box. Well, finally, we came up with full line of laundry, washers, dryers, combos, dishwashers in different sizes, refrigerators, microwaves, cooking, ventilation, wine refrigerator, and each of these has multiple models, and we still continue to do that till this day. And we do strive to have some kind of innovation in all of them. This is what we try to do in what we call balance and harmony, smooth operations in all departments. When we do, most of our products are made overseas in Europe and in China. At that time, 100% was actually made in, uh, it was made in Europe. And due to the global shifts, we had to move it to China. And doing international business, I mean, you're looking at forecasting for 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, dealing with foreign exchange issues, production issues, port delays and strikes. So trying to manage this whole thing was quite an exercise. And the US is also a very big country. So we set up different warehouses in Los Angeles and Toronto and Seattle and New Jersey and Houston and Miami. We had 8 different distribution centers all over the country and ships coming all over. And so we can get closer to the customers and do just-in-time deliveries. Customers have always been impatient that when you buy a product, you want it delivered yesterday. Nobody's willing to wait for a long time because you want to see the product that you bought. So we started specializing in all those things. And this is the stage now, at the stage where I was at the peak of my career when I spoke to the chamber last time. So I would say this would be interval time now, if you're watching a movie. So this is the interval. A lot has transpired since then, and that actually became the story. I guess all up to now would have been a success story, but I don't know if it would have made a book because it would have been like every other successful entrepreneur who did that. So soon after that, maybe the next year or so after I talked with all of you, we were doing very well. Our Italian suppliers were taking note of us and they said, wow, this is a great market. This is America. Maybe we should establish an office in America and start doing business over there because Equator is doing well. It's our own brand, Equator, which is what I had created. And let us try to do our own brand in America. So they decided to launch over here. So they set up, so we went to the same show. We have our Equator over there and they had their 3 booths down. They had their booth over there. And of course, they're a multi-billion-dollar company, $5 billion company, and we're a small independent company, like a boutique company. And we couldn't match them. And needless to say, all our distributors, I mean, it's like you're going against the house. They were the house, they're the manufacturer. And there was no way we could compete with the prices. And one by one, over the next 6 months to a year, all our distributors started switching to them. At the same time, we discovered our product had a quality problem. And there was a small 30-cent part that they did not put inside our machine, and our machine started catching fire and having a lot of problems. And we had almost 30,000 machines that went down on us. So we had something like a recall, and that cost the company very, very dearly. I mean, we spent, I would say, a lot of money, millions of dollars in trying to resolve all these things and save the brand. And finally, I decided to sue the company in Italy, and there was a settlement, and I was able to take care of many of these issues. But the company was in a very weakened state. I mean, you had our suppliers going against us in the sense that who wanted a piece. And that is one thing that another lesson I learned, that the more successful you are in life, the more envious and more people are looking at you and who want a piece of it, and they're not necessarily having good feelings. So on one side, our supplier started having these things and they wanted a piece of the pie. Then our lawyer who negotiated the settlement, he said half of it belongs to him due to some, let's say, sleight of hand that he used. And so even the second half of the money that we were supposed to receive, we didn't receive that. And there was another case over there. And the third thing is, many of you have been to the office building that I had on Beltway 8 with the art gallery and so on. Some of you remember that. And the people who I was supposed to work with, they decided also to, pull the plug and decided that they liked the building better than me and said, we want it, and took over the building, and whatever I was supposed to get. I didn't get, and I lost the building too. So it was a completely betrayal, and there were three of these that happened one after the other. So I was sort of in a vortex that happened. I mean, it was, and so I went into a sort of soul searching as an entrepreneur. That what is this all about? I mean, is being an entrepreneur about money? Is it really, or is it for fame or social standing, or what is it all about? And I had done it for for the pure joy of creation. Of course, you need to earn a profit and do R&D and so on. But it actually came as a big shock to me to see that the ethics and so on weren't being followed. As I said, not coming from a business family, I couldn't believe that people who I would eat and drink with would actually do something, whether it's the factory or partners or attorneys or whatever it is. It was a big shock to me, and I didn't realize that. But at the same time, legally speaking, I was still on the hook to to all the customers. I mean, there were hundreds of thousands of machines out there, and I was filled with great in some ways shame, you can say, that I let down my customers, because here I was, an Indian guy. They didn't know me personally, but I was all over the press at that time, national press. People knew. And so it was almost like I gave my word that I would take care of their machines, and their machines were breaking down and catching fire, and there's nobody to give them parts and do service. And I felt I was letting down my country, India. I was letting down my company, letting down my family. And so it was almost like a honor thing that I decided to fight with the company and to fight to save this. And it came out from the depths, and I went through a very bad period of 2 or 3 years where I had to actually see, uh, what am I going to do to get this back? Is it over? It may be over. I mean, 97% of businesses go bust in the first 3 years. 90% go bust in the first 3 years, 97 in the first maybe 10 or 20 years. Maybe I'm just a statistic. But I said, no, it's not over. There's too much at stake. I'm going to fight and come back. So, but now I don't have a supplier. I don't have cash, don't have money. I've got all these legal issues. So by then China had come up. And so I decided uh, as they say, keep searching. And as Steve Jobs said, if you haven't found it yet, keep looking. And so I decided to keep looking. So I went to China and I met up with a company over there, and they were also looking to come out of their issues, and they were looking for some innovation. I had a lot of ideas, and I said, if you do this, we can do this together. I have the ideas, I can market in America, and we have many strong competitors. It's not to say we have in our space in appliances, there are huge multi-billion-dollar companies over there, and so we have to come up with interesting products that we can sell, and the quality has to be good. So the first principle for entrepreneurship is that you must have innovation. You must define a problem and you must solve the problem. And so I decided that I'm going to solve this problem. By then I had LG, I had Samsung, I had Haier, I had GE have gotten. We were the first in this product, firstly in front loading machines and also in the combination washer dryer. But by then I had 5 or 6 competitors who were breathing down us. When we started the business, we had 100% market share because we created the market. But by the time all these legal problems and so on happened, we were down to something like 5%. And I said, that's a pity. I mean, we created the market. How can we let this happen to us? So we defined the problem and we said, let's solve the problem. And how do you solve the problem? And I was trying hard to solve and so the secret that I found to do innovation is to use empathy, is to find out what customers really want. And so we went down into the problems our customers were facing, which is our dealers and our customers, and in the usage of the machines. And at that time, we had 2 models. We had, in a combination machine, we had a vented dry system and we had a ventless dry system, which are completely different drying mechanisms. And we decided to innovate in this. So you see this slide over here. The first one is vented and the second one is ventless. And we combined those 2 functions. By then we had a lot of technology and we had electronics and so on. And we patented this dual drying system that could work by pressing a button. You could switch one to the other, and that is our patent in the whole world. This is our unique system. And this came out about 7 years ago, and we've been running on this, and every year, 2 years, we come up with innovations on this system. But then, of course, I'd also learned about strengthening our internal systems and doing better management, because, as I mentioned, being a professional, we are in silos. And in a finance person, I was a specialist in finance, but now I had to learn a whole bunch of things. I had to learn marketing and engineering and so on. But we had weak controls, and that's why we had some of the quality problems that happened to our company. And so I came up with this Yin and Yang system, and there are some more of my theories. And the Yin and Yang system is the importance of balancing opposing forces, where Yin is defense, Yang is offense. And in a company, the defensive parts are admin, logistics, and service. I'm just giving an example. And the Yang is the offense, which is sales, marketing, finance, production. And they have to be harmonious. You can't say we're only going to sell product. You must have the administration to process the orders in time. You must have logistics to deliver in time. On the other side, you must have finance to finance the whole thing. Production must take place in time. And finally, when everything happens, service must be there to take care of a customer, because you can say we're doing everything, but if service is left out, the whole thing tanks. So this is the whole theory that we came up, and our company is operating on these principles nowadays, and many, many more in detail, which I go into in the book. So the book is a story also, and I'm going back to the book because, that is the second part of it. But it also gives my theories of somebody who's managed to come back from collapse and from the brink of it, And so I really had to come back and see what really is the meaning of this whole thing, I mean, what is the meaning of entrepreneurship? I mean, is it to make money? And I came back that an entrepreneur has an idea for a product or a service that can change the world. So an entrepreneur is not somebody who goes to a place and runs a cash flow or a convenience store or a gas station or a franchise operation. An entrepreneur is somebody who can change the world, and that's what I was trying to do in this system. I mean, an entrepreneur must have a curious mind. You must be willing to learn all the time. You must have commitment to your idea, not fail. You must have persistence, almost till the point of stubbornness, perseverance, resilience, and you must be able to form relationships to get off the ground. I mean, in my case, I went to many different countries, but any entrepreneur has to learn all these things. I remember one of the things when I was going for early in my business career, and this is soon after I'd found the $25,000 to finance the first container. And few months after that, I was at a trade show, and the distributor said, okay, I want to buy your products, and here's a $100,000 order. I said, wow, that's great, but how am I going to deliver? I don't have 100,000. Okay, I didn't have $100,000 worth of credit cards even later on, so a few months later. So he says, what do you mean? You're at this show, you're trying to sell your products, you deliver to me, and I'll pay you 30 days later, which is the way business works. I said, I just don't have the money. He says, are you kidding me? I said, no. If you can finance me, I can deliver the product to you 3 months from now. And he looked at me and stared into my eyes. And he said, are you good for the money? And I looked back and said, yes. And he took out his checkbook and he gave me a check for $100,000 and he walked away. And that's what trust is all about. And here I am, this guy from India, and this is an American guy, and I'm meeting him. He doesn't know where I've come from and where I'm going. And he's giving me a check for $100,000 based on trust. Yes, these things do happen. And so that is how the company grew. Needless to say, the numbers and so on are there in the book. The company grew very fast, and then it crashed also. And so I had to come, to really find what it was all about, and to find meaning in my life and meaning for my company as well. And so this is the second principle of entrepreneurship. The meaning of my life is to make your customer happy, is to spark joy in my customer. The machine must be delivered safely. When they open it, they should look at the machine and say, wow, what a beautiful machine. I'm happy I paid $1,000 for this, and they're going to love using it every day. That is the purpose for which my company stands for now. And I go back, this is a very rarely used, we see this in India, this quotation. Mahatma Gandhi is known for a lot of things, but this is a very important quote. The customer is the most important visitor on our premises. He is not dependent on us. We are dependent on him. He is not an interruption on our work. He is the purpose of it. He is not an outsider on our business. He is part of it. We are not doing him a favor by serving him. He is doing us a favor by giving us an opportunity to do so. I didn't pay much attention to this, and I'm sure many of you have read this before, but it is very, very true, and I now realize the value of this. So as I said, I found the meaning of what my company is to do, is to do going forward. I have to do business ethically, with integrity, build customer trust, build it back. And of course, even though many years have gone, almost 7 or 10 years have gone by, have the best customer service. And most of all, follow the golden rule, which is the third principle, which is to treat others the way you wish to be treated. So even in my own companies, people come back and say, well, the customer is asking these things and we don't think it's reasonable. And I say, if you had a machine and that happened to you, would you feel happy about that? They say no. And then why are you treating our customers that way? Do the right thing. So as you've seen, our company has been through 3 phases, different phases, that I've talked about. The Italy phase, the China phase, the crashing phase, the high and the fall, And I like this quote. This is from Confucius. Our greatest glory is not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. So it's very easy to fall into a trap and say, okay, we fall, and you feel sorry for yourself and you get into depression and so on. But you got to rise. And if I've talked about 101 things I learned, each of those was an expensive lesson, and I managed to rise every time. So why did I write this book, Underdog Thinking? Underdog thinking reflects that I was the underdog. I came in with nothing, only my education, only my will to succeed. I was an underdog without in the appliance industry. I made it, I lost it. Nobody has ever told me that they're not going to buy my machines for this reason or because I didn't have any money. I've had to prove it to them at every single stage. There's no excuse for being a small company. You have to provide the same service. I come now to the role of a CEO, which is my CEO, and many of you run companies and are entrepreneurs. And that is, you have to manage foreseen and unforeseen situations. And this book was published a few months ago, but since then we've had the pandemic. So if you look at the central part, you manage the internal elements. Beyond that, you have known factors which you look at. Then you have unknown dangers. And then you have, on the outermost part, external threats which you don't know. And if you can't control the external threat, you have a crisis. So this is what I look at every day when my salespeople come to me with a deal and say, we've sold X number of machines, we closed this deal. I say, great, let's celebrate for 5 minutes. That's what I know. What is it I don't know? And I focused my whole day on what I don't know, because that can be dangerous and catastrophic based on what happened to our company. So when the pandemic happened, I decided to move very quickly and start evaluating all the fixed costs of our company. And we said, let's see if we have a 50% reduction of sales, what's going to happen to us? We've started cutting our costs. We started holding off on the marketing expenses, evaluating opportunities. And I decided based on the information that we are going to expand our operations and also in the opportunities, expand our operations to India, which has been pending for some time. And so here we are in 2020. And as you know, in the pandemic, which is here with the last 3 months only, with the house help and so on not being there, we are going to launch our products in India. Space saving solution products are being launched. This is our India washing machine. Just to let you know, it's a very auspicious day for our company in the sense that our first shipment is arriving in India tomorrow of this washing machine that you're seeing over here, arriving in Navasheva port. And this is our India washing machine with the sari cycle, sanitize cycle, allergen cycle, quiet cycle, and my favorite of all, the bedbug cycle, because many of us have traveled in third-class trains and lived in hostels where we had cutmals and so on. And so that was able to resolve this. And I believe, as far as I know, this is the only washing machine in the world that has a bedbug cycle. And this is an India-specific machine. And I hope it will solve some problems in India, you know. We're coming up with a dryer with a UV light to kill germs. And I'm going a little bit into detail to show as a small company, we have to thrive on innovation. And so my conclusion is that, for a small company to thrive, you need to have innovation. You need to have excellence. There is no excuse for being a small company. You have to perform just like the big companies. And we've managed it for 30 years. And you must have ethics, which is you have to make good products. You have to deliver superior services. And if something goes wrong with your product, you have to fix it. You have to honor your commitments and above all else, serve your customers. So thank you very much to WZCC for your invitation to speak with you. I pray to God that I get the strength and wisdom to serve the community and my customers the way the Zoroastrian community has done, with innovation, excellence, and ethics. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Atul. That was an excellent talk, really good lessons, really enjoyed everything that you shared with us. So folks, if y'all could use the chat and start typing in some questions for Atul. We've got about 15 minutes left in the session. So the first question that we have over here is, if you were to start all over again, what changes would you make?
Well, that's a great question. Firstly, I would have had more internal controls. The weakest point in our company was when we didn't know we had a quality problem and the Italian company was shipping us products with this 30-cent piece that was eliminated. We should have had more internal controls. We had faith and we said, well, our responsibility is to do the marketing, even though it was our brand, and the manufacturer's responsibility is to do the manufacturing. And that was a false premise, because we don't know whether they intentionally sabotaged our product with a view to enter the US market. I mean, okay, I don't want to suspect that, but many people have said that's ultimately happens, that does happen in the business world. But we should have had controls, and now we actually have very strong controls. We look at ourselves as doctors of our products, and we have software for every single shipment, every single machine. We know the day it is produced in which part of the world, which container it is shipped on, which port it arrives at, which distributor it goes to, which dealer it goes to, which customer it goes to. Every time the customer calls, it is logged in on that machine and goes on until for the life of that machine until it is scrapped, which may be a 10-year cycle or so. And we have those controls. I personally test every new product in my house. Needless to say, my wife is sometimes not happy about that. Our home looks like a testing lab. But you know, that's what we have to do, and that's the commitment that one needs to do. But great question, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you, Atul. The next question is, what plans do you have moving forward on moving your manufacturing from China? I'm assuming the question is that moving it away from China to someplace else. I'm assuming that's the question.
If that is the question, yes, it's a great question. We depend on supply chains, and the particular field that I'm in, which is mid to heavy engineering, you need steel. Many of you engineers, you need steel, you need components, you have stamping machines, you need trained manpower, you need the supply chain for all the components. So in a washing machine, you have pumps and valves and hoses and different components that go in there. And if you don't have the complete supply chain close by and able to deliver in, just in time or within a reasonable period of time, it's going to fall off. So China has become the place where these things happen. There are very few other countries that can offer that. Now things may change, but for the last 15 or 18 years or 20 years, that's been the way. And not to say that people haven't tried. There are some countries. You have Turkey, for example. That's another good country. But I'll be very honest with you. The efficiency that we see is great. I mean, in doing business with China, you send an email or a drawing today. By the time I wake up tomorrow, you have a response. It is precise. Doing business, I'm in Houston. Doing business with China is like doing business with, say, California. The exchange rate is almost fixed. The efficiency is there. So it's very smooth. Other countries aren't able to really offer that because you want stability of production and stability and supplies and quality and so on. We have our own inspectors at the factory. We have our own office. And so for the time being, that's what it is.
Okay, sounds good. There was a related question, but I think you've answered it already. It was, have you explored other Eastern European countries like Romania, for instance, which has an economy that's growing? So I think you've addressed that, seems like. If you want, you can add to that thought.
Well, I think the question would be that if we can manufacture there, it's possible. I think some countries like Poland have actually come in and have started doing manufacturing. I've not heard about Romania too much, but I know Poland is a good source, particularly for Europe. I think looking at the logistics, we want ease of use and trying to get products also to the US. But Romania and so on may be a good source for, say, Western Europe. And so with the new technologies that I've developed, we are actually in a global expansion plan, for, as I mentioned about India. But we are going into the Far East late in 3 or 4 months. We're going into the Middle East soon after that. And for every country, we're coming up with very specific functions. I'll just digress a bit. So for example, for the Far East, we're going to have a sarong function. For the Middle East, we're going to have a hijab, cycle. So the production can be anywhere. We have the intellectual property and the patents and so on. So we can tie up with companies. And if somebody knows something that I don't know, I'd be happy to talk with you and explore Romania and Eastern Europe.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what should one do to stand out against its competition? How does one get the edge over similar businesses?
Innovation, innovation, innovation. That's the only thing that counts nowadays. You have to show you're better. You cannot, if you're a small company, if you're a big company, you have a brand name. Whirlpool has been there for 100 years. LG is supported by their government and they're subsidized. We're an independent company. So we don't have all those benefits. And so we have to strike out on our own and pay for our own bills. And we can say we have the best machines available. And that's all. So we talk about these features that I've just mentioned. And for that reason, we tell our customers we are better than our competitors. I'm in contact on any given day, on the downside, talking to my technicians and to the customers. Every single blog or every single comment that comes on one of our dealer websites, I see and know what they're saying. If there's any sort of product breakdown, or if there's going to be any epidemic of any component, on the other side, I'm directly in touch with the engineers, and we can change products or features and institute changes on a dime. So with technology, we're able to do these things. In the old days, we started off with fax machines and going before even telex machines. So communications have made things much easier for us to be responsive. There is no way and no excuse to say you're not performing nowadays.
Okay, thank you. Next question, any new products, especially for the Indian market?
Well, with this pandemic that's upon us now, and we have seen, I think many of us have got family over there who are not, who are quite ill prepared because of the house help not being able to come to work. We're coming up with a full new product line. With, of course, we talked about the combination washers. We got the washers and the dryers and dishwashers. We've also got vacuum cleaners coming up, and that will be of all the products for the home. That's also all going to be launched in, say, in the next three to 6 months. In the US, I saw somebody putting a comment over there, which is a convertible refrigerator freezer. I don't know if that's the next, was that the next question, or did I jump into that?
No, it must be further down.
Maybe it just popped up.
Yeah, but you can go ahead and speak to it.
I'll speak to it. And that is, so we are in fact launching that, as a matter of fact, in 2 or 3 weeks. What has happened with the pandemic over here, we had a run on our freezers. And in one day, we sold something like 40 freezers, you know, and it just, we sold out. We said, so because we all hear about people who are stocking up on foods, but they need freezers to stock their foods. And that's where we come in, we have the freezers. So we ran out of freezers. But then we were thinking, when the pandemic gets over, now you're going to have people with a lot of freezers. Now they're going to not want to freeze so many things. So now we have adapted one of our freezers, which can be just switchable into a refrigerator or freezer. So it can be used as a refrigerator, or just by turning a knob is now your choice. That is coming on the market in about 2 weeks' time, and we will have that available.
Okay, great. And we're kind of coming towards the end of our time over here, but let's try one more question. It says, over the last 30 years, one of the other things changing in the background was the e-commerce and digital marketing terrain. Interested to hear your perspective on the difference you observed to acquire a customer.
Well, you know, we started out in the old days when there was only faxes and telexes, and we had to read books and we had to advertise in papers. And we're seeing the transition into a complete digital and going into e-commerce. We're seeing the transition, and especially the pandemic is forcing us to go more and more in that direction. And so we're a bricks and mortar company. We sell physical products. They need to be physically stored and shipped and repaired and so on. So we actually do whatever needs to be done here. We also have an office in India. Anything that doesn't need to be physically done is done in India. Our office is in Pune. But as far as our thrust and our marketing, it is going more and more into the digital space and in trying to understand. And as we are going into that space, you have customers who are very impatient. In the old days, customers were prepared to wait for 10 days to receive a product and wait another week to have machines serviced. And we have to accelerate our plans to make sure that you deliver as fast as possible. You execute, we must have, if a customer calls, you must respond with an answer in the fastest possible time. If you have a service breakdown, you must take care of the problem quickly, otherwise it goes downhill. And there are penalties for that with blogs and the social media out there. There is a punishment. So we're out there facing the whole world now. It was sort of more controlled before, but it's becoming more complicated and more competitive. But we have to realize it and deal with it. That's all there is.
Sure, sure. So I know we didn't get to all the questions, but in the chat also, I'm seeing a lot of very positive comments about your talk. Also a comment from Mani Sarkari. She used to work for you at Ecuador.
Yes, hello.
Equator Appliances, rather. So
it's a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you. We worked very well, and Mani handled our press campaign, very successful, that I talked about, and she knew many of the people at these magazines and helped us build our company in those old days, the go-go days, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Atul and Rustam and Sharmeen. Do you all want to close out the session?
I just want to say thank you very, very much, Atul. This was truly inspiring and just an amazing session. We learned so much from you. and very positive, and thanks for everything.
Thank you very much. It's my
Yeah.
pleasure.
Atul, catching up after 13 years is really a very pleasant experience here. And I'm so happy that you have been going into so many different arenas. And one of them I remember is the art gallery you had. And I keep talking to you about it. And the next time you have something like that, do let me know.
Happily, I'll be happy to do so, and we'll connect on that. It's a pleasure talking to all of you, and thanks for the great questions. And once again, it's my pleasure and honor to be invited for the second time.
Good luck, Atul. Good luck.
Thank you very much, homie. Take care.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Atul.
Bye now.
Thank you, folks. Appreciate
you.
it. Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody. Thank you.
Great job. Great job.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye then.
Hi, Anwar.
You got a lot of friends here, you know that.
Very good presentation. Thank you.
Thank
Good luck. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Edal. ¿Cómo veo?
Gayo.
Gayo.
Ay,